We've made it. Week 1 is right around the corner, our drafts are finished, and we can look ahead to an exciting 2024 regular season. Today, we are kicking off our Love-Hate series as we look into 3 players I'm trying to start everywhere and 3 players I'm looking to sit. But before we dig in, head over to 4for4.com, use promo code YouTube to get yourself 25% off any subscription plan. Start Jordan Love. The Eagles started off their NFL draft with 3 straight defensive pieces, including Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, to bolster their secondary. These rookies have a tough task ahead of them, slowing down one of the best passing attacks we saw in the second half of the 2023 season. Packers ranked first in EPA per dropback from weeks 13 through the playoffs, and with so many question marks as to who to start among the pass catchers, the best route will likely be Jordan Love, particularly here in week 1. According to 4for4's schedule-adjusted fantasy points allowed metrics, the Eagles ranked 26th in AFPA allowed to the quarterback position, 30th to the wide receiver position, and 26th to opposing offenses. Mitchell and DeJean are likely going to improve this defense as time rolls on, but it's not going to be enough to fade Love in our very first matchups. Betting lines on the game seem to agree, as the 48.5 total for Friday's game is the 3rd highest of the week. Start Kenneth Walker. Zach Charbonnet is one of the best backups in football, but I don't expect that to be an issue on opening weekend. Seattle should have a relatively easy time bulldozing the Broncos defense that allowed a league-worst 5.0 yards per carry in 2023. The Seahawks also have the 3rd highest betting margin on the week as 6-point favorites, behind only the Bengals and the Bills. We should see plenty of run from Kenneth Walker this week, and he happens to be involved in one of the most intriguing offenses of the year under new offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb. If the team takes to the air more often, that could still push Walker into a fringe RB1 this week, as his 1.30 yards per route run in his sophomore season was good enough for a top 15 finish among the position. Start Chris Godwin. The coaching staff, including receivers coach Brian McClendon, has been adamant that we're going to see Chris Godwin back in the slot more often during the 2024 season. They backed up their claim by sticking Godwin in the slot on 6 of his 7 preseason snaps, and now they have a chance to unroll him in his more comfortable position against the Commanders' defense that was woeful against slot receivers last year. In 2023, Washington allowed the 7th highest yards per attempt, the 7th highest completion rate, and the highest quarterback rating when targeting a player lined up in the slot. For Godwin, he was his typical productive self when he was allotted slot snaps in the last coaching regime. Among 57 receivers who earned at least 40 targets out of the slot last season, Godwin finished 21st with 8.8 yards per target, 23rd with 12.9 yards per reception, and 13th with a 0.36 EPA per target. Godwin was being a bit slept on during fantasy drafts, and you should be rewarded with a solid wide receiver 3 performance in week 1 if you had the gumption to select him this summer. Sit Brian Robinson. With a very limited upside, we should be thinking twice before we start Brian Robinson as either an RB3 or a flex option. It wouldn't be much of a surprise if Robinson consistently out-carries teammate Austin Eckler, but his moderate pass game role is very unlikely to increase. On paper, the roles are clearly defined as the 6'2", 225-pound Robinson will operate as a short yardage and goal line back, as Eckler will flex his elite-level receiving game as the 3rd down back, assuming most of his ankle woes are behind him. Harkening back to Cliff Kingsbury's time with the Cardinals, the team targeted the running back position at a 16.1% clip from 2019 to 2022, more or less in line with league average. We can assume that number is likely the high watermark, though, with Jaden Daniels set to take off with the ball even more often than Kyler Murray did in his time with Kingsbury. This would set a very hard cap on both running back ceilings in fantasy football. What's even worse for Robinson in particular is the possibility that their new quarterback calls his own number around the goal line. Robinson handled 8 attempts from within the opponent's 5-yard line last season, which was 62% of the backfield share, while Eckler scored an efficient 6 touchdowns on 11 attempts in those same scenarios back in 2022. Robinson is a desperation play in a week where no one should be desperate. Sit Ladd McConkey. I am very interested in McConkey's long-term outlook, but this early in his rookie season, he doesn't need to be starting in our fantasy lineups. And at least in this week, it's not so much how I think he fits into the passing game plan and more to do with what kind of offensive environment we are going to have. With 2 teams who have done everything in their power to stand behind a run-heavy mentality, the Chargers and Raiders game is currently projected for 40.5 points, the lowest total of the week. If that low of a total ends up being correct, with 2 teams who we figure will be in a neutral game script for most of the matchup, we we should be doing what we can to fade the passing attacks. Starting Devontae Adams and maybe even Brock Bowers would be one thing, but McConkey, Joshua Palmer, and the rest of the ancillary pieces here can rest on your bench until we see one of these teams get pushed by an aerial attack. And while we're on the subject, the Chargers are facing the Carolina Panthers next week and the Steelers in Week 3. We might need to keep McConkey in the back seat until the Chargers face off against the Chiefs in Week 4. Sit Dalton Schultz. Dalton Schultz had a solid first year with the Houston Texans, stringing together a 59 for 635 and 5 touchdown stat line while accruing 6 games with double-digit fantasy points. Sadly, most of that production came at the beginning of the year, scoring 73.5 of his 121.5 PPR points through Week 9, including an explosive 10 for 130-1 performance. Following Tank Dell's fractured fibula in Week 13, the thought was that Schultz could possibly earn more of the target share, but that didn't exactly pan out. While missing Weeks 13 and 14 himself, he returned for the final month of the season and posted nearly identical production, despite his target share ticking up from 15.7 from Weeks 1 through 11 to 18.2% in the final 4 games. His route participation was almost exactly the same, from 66.8% in Weeks 1 through 11 to 66.5% in that final stretch. Heading into the 2024 season, Dell is back to full health. Nico Collins will be back to continue showcasing himself as one of the best X receivers in the NFL, and the team happened to add Stephon Diggs to the wide receiver room this offseason. On top of the incredibly talented wide receiver room Schultz has to deal with, the team also replaced Devin Singletary, who had 0.14 targets per route run, the 64th highest in the league, with Joe Mixon, who had 0.20 targets per route run, the 36th highest through free agency. Schultz should be on streaming radars as a bye-week replacement at points throughout the season, but didn't need to be drafted, particularly where he was going as a top 12 tight end.